Hi, my name is Elmarie Wood, and thank you very much for attending the cross-genre panel. I'm here with a bunch of my friends, and I can't wait to get into this really interesting conversation about this topic that we all love. So let's start with Tim. Tim, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Tim Waggoner, write dark fantasy and horror and media tie-ins, published around 50 novels, 7 collection of short stories, and 3-time winner of the Bram Stoker Award. And I just yesterday started my 24th year teaching English at Sinclair Community College.
Very nice. Nicole?
I'm Nicole Givens Kurtz, and I am the publisher for Mocha Memoirs Press. I'm also a writer who writes cross-genre noir novels and fantasy novels.
Michael?
I'm Michael G. Williams. I write queer-themed horror, urban fantasy, and science fiction. Each of those genres, I do not like to color inside the lines. So like my science fiction has a little horror in it. My horror has a little urban fantasy. My urban fantasy has a little of everything because that's kind of the deal. And I also am the co-host of the podcast Arcane Carolinas about the myths, legends, and lore of North and South Carolina.
Cool. Rhonda?
Hi, I'm Rhonda Jackson Garcia, aka RJ Joseph, and I am a creative and academic writer, writing mostly in the academic, horror, and romance genres. And I am really excited to be here.
Hansi?
Hi, I'm an independent filmmaker, primarily focusing on fan studies and fan works. And I've been documenting interviews with fans for over 20 years now. So I'm working on an archive for a university for their pop culture studies, archiving all my work at this point.
Marc?
Hi, I'm Marc Abbot. I am a horror author out of Brooklyn, New York. I am also on the podcast Beef, Wine, and Shenanigans as a co-host. And I'm also a professor for the Speculative Fiction Academy.
As many of you are, by the way, just putting that out there. Rachel? Oh, you're on mute, Rachel.
Sorry, I am not a professor, but I am a writer, and I enjoy writing in a variety of genres. Like Michael, I have trouble staying in the lines. And I also publish horror through Crone Girls Press, which is an indie horror micropress specializing in anthologies. And I think that one of the reasons why everything that I write might have a little bit of different flavors in it is that I also consider myself to be a pretty enthusiastic reader, lifelong reader, and I will just read anything as long as it stays still long enough. T-shirts, bumper stickers, back in the cereal box.
See, I told you I hang out with some pretty cool folks. What do we have? Podcasters, publishers, people who write 50 books and up. I mean, filmmakers. Excellent bunch of people. So let's talk about cross-genre. It's the combining, obviously, of more than one genre to create something new, right? I mean, but I think that's a huge and amazing art form. Mm-hmm. What about combining genres is appealing to you? Like, where'd this idea come from? And we're just going to just jump in and have conversation like we normally do. So take it away, anyone.
I love it. I immediately think of things that do that I love, like Spaced. They mixed up genres so much. There's horror, there was references to all sorts of films and TV shows, and the Cornetto trilogy, is all like that. There's so many shows now, like Supernatural, that with the meta in the Supernatural, where they're aware of the fandom and actually including the fandom in the show. I think this is a really interesting turn stories are taking, and it's exciting.
I think that I think everything entertainment-wise is really starting to come together like that. And I think that there's like a kind of a paradox. On the one hand, you have to know what category you're going to promote something on Amazon, right? Because you got to pick one or two. But on the other hand, consumers of entertainment fiction are getting, they're getting it through like Supernatural with the meta. If you look at classic Trek, there's always a couple of episodes where like Spock and Kirk went off to solve a mystery, so we're in this kind of a space where you can experience so many different ages. Like if you want to watch classic Trek, you just go watch it on your streaming service. Streaming service is Shudder, to be complete.
I'm a fan.
Right? So I really do think that fans have genre expectations, but they're also experiencing entertainment fiction in more of a liminal space where if you subvert those expectations in a good way, you can really draw them in and make them fall in love with what you've got.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things we want is to inspire surprise. We want to inspire awe. We want people to read something and think, I never would have thought of that. I've never seen this before. And one of the best ways to do that is to take the genres that we love and break them down into their little Lego pieces and put them back together again in some new and interesting way. Also, I think that, like Rachel, I expect we're all pretty like wide, voracious readers. And when I think of an idea for a science fiction story, I can't help but think of the horrifying angle of that. How would this be misused in addition to how it would be used? Whose life would be damaged by this improvement, in addition to all the people whose lives would be legitimately improved? If I'm writing horror, I can't help but ask questions like, why is this circumstance happening? What does it suggest about the universe, supernaturally or scientifically beyond our understanding? And you look at the origins of a lot of these genres, the people who were creating them didn't really see clean boundaries between them,
When you look at Frankenstein, which is, Shelley is often credited with both founding horror and science fiction to that degree. And if you think about Frankenstein, it's horrific, but it's also a science story, right? That's based in the science of the time. I think we went cross genres. I think we've been out not coloring in the lines a long time. Like it's not new. If you think about the pulpy fiction of like Pulp Fiction or the Penny Dreadfuls, they were a mix of everything. And they weren't just confined to like you would fly to the moon and then there'd be monsters in the center. Like it's always been like a mixed bag. I think for speculative fiction, I think if you look at romance, there's a definitive line with romance. It's either happy for now or happy forever, right? There are tropes that are well within the lines for romance. We mess with those too.
But you can do a romance comedy,
right?
A romance horror too, like Risk Cutters. I would kind of say is romantic horror comedy.
Why not have that that's actually my next question. Like, do you stick to one genre or two genres that you're mashing up, or can you just pick? Do you pick a whole lot of them? I pick a whole lot of them, but what do you guys do?
Put them all in there. Throw them all in there.
Right?
I pick what serves the story often enough, but since I tend to write mysteries in fantastic settings or weird westerns, I write weird westerns too. So there's always because I write weird westerns, there's already a blend, right, of the western and the weird. Sometimes you get some sci-fi in there too. With some post-apocalyptic stuff. So I guess it depends on what's serving the story as to what pieces of another genre I may use to like blend together. It's almost like making a smoothie, right? It depends on if you feel like, I want more nutrition in terms of, or energy, I might put in X, Y, and Z. But today I feel energized, but I might want something chocolatey. And so it just depends on like the flavor of the story and what genres I choose to blend together.
It doesn't pigeonhole us. Which is what I love, because I mean, starting out as a writer, we're constantly, when you're first starting out, everybody tells you got to stick to one thing because your audience, you're a hard sell if you're all over the place.
Right.
But where's the fun in that? I mean, we can do so many things. Like
that's the fun in that.
Right.
It's and even now, like we'll write something and go to someone and say, okay, this is a horror story, and they'll be like, it's more urban fantasy with a touch of, that's how you should label it. And it's like, oh, so now we're giving it other labels. We can't keep it in one thing. I absolutely love mashing up. I mean, horror for me will always be its foundation, but in everything there's something horrifying. And it's and like Nicole said, it's basically where you set everything, and where you take it from there, because there are so many things you can do when you cross genre, and a lot of times we only need that one person to do that one story that everybody goes, wow, I didn't even know you could do something like that.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's the it thing. Everybody's trying to write that one thing. So I mean, I think it's just wonderful to be able to just have a mixed bag.
Yeah. I want to talk about the Dark Tower, because that is, for me, the epitome of cross-genre fiction.
Yeah.
The Dark, is anyone familiar with Stephen King's The Dark Tower? It has it's horror, it's science fiction, it's time travel, it's weird fiction because it has cosmic
Western.
Horror. It's a Western. It's magic realism. It's so many. It's so much. There's so much there.
Yeah.
And so many blended stories. It's almost difficult to. You can't actually put the Dark Tower on the shelf. I mean, it's Stephen King, so it's going to go in horror because he's as a horror writer. But it's like Eyes of the Dragon, which is also another Stephen King novel. It is so much more than that, and that's because it has major chunks of so many other things. And I think that's what's freeing about the Dark Tower. I think that's why that is one of his most famous works, and most popular. Like, people are sending him death threats, finish the damn series, because and he did finish it eventually. But I think a lot of that was because it had such a rabid fandom for it, because it hits so many different genres. It's not boring.
You know, and I think go ahead.
Well, I think that one of the things that I like about the whole idea of cross genre is, with the exception of my beloved Romance Landia, like I totally respect that. I demand that everybody else respect that, like all those boundaries. You know, like you just have to have certain stuff if you're gonna call it a romance. And don't get me wrong, in romance, the writers are very generous. You can have love everywhere you want it. Just don't call it a romance if it does not have these genre defining elements. And that's not even so much just us writers, that's like the readers, because that's what they expect. And so I think that's one of the things that's really freeing about writing across genres, though, especially in speculative fiction, is that so many of the genres do play so well together. And so, like, me having that dark background, like even when I was in grad school writing my thesis, a romance novel, it was still so heavy. It was still so dark, you know. So when I have a love story, for me as a horror writer, love memes and romance memes like love beyond death. Right. And so that's not something that romance readers, they don't want that. They're not going to buy into that, and they will call you out rightfully about that. But most genres do play so well together, especially in speculative fiction, because they're siblings. And so, you know, like Nicole mentioned earlier, like the when the roots and the origins are so closely related, which I think what really interests me about romance and horror, though, is that they have the same parent in Gothic writing, except that they sort of like were adopted by different parents because they kind of went in different directions, but they came from the same thing.
I mean, I would also point out, you know, Bram Stoker's Dracula, I have the annotated version, and like they point out, like, you know, all like he used all these different medias to do it. It was emails and not emails, but journal entries and telegrams and typing. And, you know, I mean, my question for the writers is, because, you know, as a filmmaker, I can play with different media, but with writers, I mean, do you think just in the world now, with all the awareness of all the pop culture and everything, you can write, you know, without that being in your head?
I think that it being in your head helps the story along. I mean, it's almost like another genre. I wish they would call pop culture a genre, you know, because that is another thing to pull from, you know. But that's just me. I'm the moderator today. I'm not really talking much. So somebody else answer that from a writer's perspective. I couldn't help myself. I had to.
For
Yeah,
me personally, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think you're right. It's like the sea we all swim in.
Mhm.
When I was growing up, I mean, the everything was cross genre because you didn't have streaming TV. You had one show after another on like maybe 3 channels,
Yeah.
and so you'd watch whatever. And you'd have like, oh, it's a mystery movie, and now it's a science fiction movie, and now it's a talk show, and now it's this.
Yeah, well,
And
I don't
then,
know what you're talking about. I'm entirely too young to remember that.
right. Well, way back when, you would crank up the TV to get it going.
The TV would cut off at midnight. I mean, like legit off.
Right.
I remember that. And hangers as rabbit ears.
Yes. But then, when I got into comics around sometime around middle school, Spider-Man would be fighting, a super criminal one week, and the next week it's vampires, and after that he's like thrown back in time, and it's just this great big mishmash. And I think that you can see that like in George Lucas's stuff too. I mean, he's older than I am, but still came out of that sort of generation where everything was swirling around. And I think that I think it was Nicole was talking about the pulp. I think you're talking about the pulp stuff earlier. And I think it's a big part of it. You look at those pictures of all the dozens and dozens of pulp magazines in the newsstand, and it's all these different images at once of cowboys and spaceships and romance and ghouls and whatever. And I think that we swim in all of this stuff, and then some of it we take on purpose, but a lot of it just comes out of us subconsciously because we live in it.
And Michael was talking about that earlier, how that's just the way his stories come, right, Michael?
Yeah. Well, and also I think that, so I think all of us, each of us has his or her ideal reader. Each of us knows the person whom we imagine is reading the book as we write it. At least I do. And mine has a name, and she's read everything I've written in it. And she's the person that every book I'm like, she's got to like it, and then I'll know it's good. And and she's read a lot, and she's watched a lot. And I think that as I'm writing, I am continually saying, what would somebody who reads this say? Am I creating a moment where they're going to say, has this character never seen a horror movie? And so like the characters need to live in a world in which their own genre exists as something that they've been exposed to, or their reactions to what they're experiencing will make no sense to a reader who lives in a world in which that genre exists, that they've consumed. If they don't have the opportunity as a reader to say, okay, they get it. They know, don't go into the basement. Don't go through that door by themselves. Don't whatever. Don't split the party, whatever the deal is.
All of them.
As long as that reader.
Don't have sex, don't you?
Look in front of you when you run. Like, pay attention. Don't fall over there.
Keep falling.
Don't hide behind the chainsaws. Get in the running car.
Like, the readers are going to be having those reactions. They're going to be thinking, what idiot is this? Like, why am I supposed to care what happens to them now? And so I think for me, it's important for maintaining that emotional link between myself and the reader.
I think there's that point that you just made, Michael, I think is really, really important to doing cross-genre well. Having worked with some newer writers or writers who in the earlier stages of their journey, there's sometimes a misunderstanding of what genre is, and it's seen as something that's restrictive, right? Like, oh, well, and then, of course, well, I'm going to be a rebel and I'm going to break these rules and this and that. I'm like, hold on a second. Lots of people break the rules, but they know what they're doing, whether because they've been writing for a while or they have been reading the genre that they're writing in, which, by the way, you should. I don't know why I have to tell people to do that.
Oh my gosh.
You should be doing that.
Right? But I really do think that genre is not restrictive. If I'm writing, so I do have a romance pen name, and I've written category romance. I enjoy reading it very much and writing it very much. And when I first started writing, it was very hard because coming from speculative fiction, I wanted to write car chases and explosions and like magical battles. And I was like, no, the focus in that genre is relationships. So I wrote my little relationships, but they were big, actually. They were very, very dramatic. But then when I went back to horror urban fantasy, I found that what I had learned writing romance was making me a better horror urban fantasy writer because I had learned more about how to write those emotions into
Fabulous.
Yep. But, you know, interesting. You made a good point. I think it was also made earlier. There's a reason why people think the genre is restrictive. Back in the day, as Tim put it, I don't know this phrase either, but back in the day, they used to talk, editors used to tell us that, listen, you've got to write one genre. If you don't, you're unfocused, and unfocused writing is not good writing. So you've got to stay in a lane, pick one and stay in that lane. Don't go doing what we're talking about doing right here, this cross genre stuff. It wasn't respected. It wasn't bought, not by and large, right? Not widely. And a lot of us were told this is not the way to be successful. So when you did break those quote unquote rules, you were sort of saying, okay, I'm willing to work, I'm not going to be mainstream published. I'm going to work, on this, oh my God, self-publishing. We don't even know what that is yet. And small press don't know what that is. But we're going to try it, right? Because we want to get the story out the way we want it out. And it was like a stigma almost. And if you were doing it, you knew you were doing it and going to restrict your audience, to which case that literally makes no sense. You should be broadening your audience based upon what we're talking about here. But how do you think that's changed in the past? I don't know, let's say 20 years, because I think, we need to give it a good amount of time to actually snowball. So
we've had 20 years of Marvel movies. Sure, right, exactly. And I'm not picking on superhero movies because I do enjoy them, but every Marvel movie is not the same movie. It's a fantasy with heroes. It's a horror with heroes. It's a comedy sidekick with heroes. It's a this with heroes. They're all very different. Like if you keep my favorite one is Winter Soldier, right? Which is an espionage film, but with superheroes. And so if you look at all of them, if you look at Marvel's movies, they're kind of grooming the public, if you will.
Oh yeah.
To look at this mashup of genres. And I think Tim said it earlier, this is a comic book thing. It happens in comics all the time.
Yeah.
It's always happened in comics. The weirdness, the time travel, Kolchak, the TV show also set us up for that. So did X-Files. So I think there was a lot of kind of like a grooming of the public that this is possible and entertaining, right? And so I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's, like I said earlier, I don't think it's new in terms of but I do think it's popular now in ways that it wasn't before, because as Mark mentioned, they told us, I remember, I've been doing this for 25 years, and they were like, I know you're not writing a mystery novel set in post-apocalyptic DC. Nobody's going to buy that.
Right.
And no one did.
It's so good.
I have to say this. I have to say this. I think what has changed is that everyone who is a fan of cross genre is now in Hollywood doing cross genre work.
Maybe.
Answer of the night, right?
I'm from Kevin Feige to, why is his name escaping me now? Who's basically the king of Star Wars at this point? I'm forgetting his name now. Who does?
Who did the bad robot guy?
Yeah,
J.J. Abrams.
Not J.J. Abrams. Jon
That's
Favreau.
Star Trek.
There you go.
Favreau.
Okay, yeah.
Jon Favreau's entire love of the cross genre.
Yes,
he brought that to the. We all went to the movies seeing these things and going, "This is what I loved when I was a kid."
Yeah.
This is what made these special to me, and literally Hollywood's like, well, you know what? We have new fans. No, you have fans who have been here this whole time telling you this is what we want. This is what we want to see. And you keep pigeonholing everything to say, well, no, this is how it's structured. This is how, if there isn't anything more nonsensical at this point than Friday the 13th.
Oh yeah.
We have gone, that series went from being a slasher flick to he was in space.
He was in space, yes.
He's been resurrected.
I love that one.
He was you know what? The space one, if you took Jason out of the space movie and put something else in there, it'd be a great science fiction horror film.
I still love it. They got him in space. The teenagers defrost him. It's chaos.
God. I was done. I couldn't. I watched it, but I was like, what is happening?
I think that's what's happened. And I think that all of us who have been doing this for years now are being recognized in the sense that they're like, okay, now the audience, the people are hungry for this. Who out there is writing this? And it's like, oh, look, Tim Wagner's writing this. And Tim's like, I've been writing this for 15, 25 years. It's like
book number 6, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, so it's I think that's part of what is where we've rolled into pop culture for that.
So are we trying to say that editors just kind of go with the flow and go with whatever seems popular?
It's also like social media too, right? Like people are finding each other and going, wait, I thought I was the only person who liked this blended up genre. No, you like it too. And it's right. So I think social media has a role in that as well.
Well, the fandom's on social media for different writers and stuff. I'm very involved in, you know, the writing community and promoting their work and stuff. And they're fascinated. I want to do a documentary on writers because, you know, I just did the Joe Lansdale one and like, they're so interesting and they love to tell stories. They're the perfect documentary subject.
Yeah, imagine that. We like to tell stories, definitely.
And to speak to RJ's cross genre of romance and horror, one of the things social media did was reveal how many of us grew up loving Dark Shadows. How many of us like came of age and really wanted to become Mulder and Scully.
Yes.
And how many of us just had our minds blown as kids by Jurassic Park? And I think each of those is a very different kind of cross-genre experience, and they are experienced at different points in life and different generations. But I think those three and social media really made it okay to be into this stuff in a big way.
Event Horizon.
Event Horizon.
Oh my god.
Which is like my favorite like sci-fi horror movie.
I gotta see it. Everyone keeps telling me you have to see it.
You have to see it.
Event Horizon.
You have to see it.
Weird. It's cosmic. It's like Lovecraft in space. It's so
it's
so good.
I love Lovecraft. Sure. Cool.
You
sold me.
I thought I was the only person who had either A, seen it, or B, loved it.
Yes.
No.
No, I saw that I saw that opening night, and I'm not kidding. Everyone walked out the theater in silence.
Yes.
I mean, we all went home disturbed. Like we were in the car. Nobody would talk about it. It was like we had never gone to the movies. We're like, what did we just see? No, I'm putting that out of my head tonight. No, I can't.
Okay,
I have literally told myself, don't think about that again. Don't think about that.
Movie theater. And the experience in the theater was a little bit different because we were having New York second run movie theater experience.
Yeah.
Well, there's something to be said for that as well. I mean,
I love that too.
You know, there's fun. That is an excellent example of like horror sci-fi or sci-fi horror, whatever. If you were a fan of either one predominantly, you were satisfied when you went to see that movie. It didn't matter. And do we think that visually it's been more accepted to see this mashup? Because from a literature standpoint, we're doing it, but forget our bubble. I mean, we have a nice bubble of what we, you know, how we interact, what we read, what we see. In mainstream, in the Barnes and Noble, kind of on the shelf, are we seeing that from a written standpoint, people are accepting it as easily as they're accepting it on film?
I mean, Jim Butcher is like the epitome of cross genres. And people love him. Stackhouse, all these. I mean,
yeah.
I think so, except that we do have to kind of think about, I mean, genres have always been very malleable, especially like not just within each of their own little segments, but in the way that there's a natural evolution that eventually we're gonna have to start playing with each other, right? I mean, that's what's gonna have to happen. But there's also the idea that with some genres, there's a stigma, because I'm like, I am in, you know, Tim's generation. So I remember, you know, when the horror writers, unfortunately, didn't want to label the book. The publishers didn't want to label the books as horror. Right. So they kind of went to thriller. And then I'm kind of thinking, well, but it's still the same thing. Like, I know it when I see it. And so I think that there's a part that we have to kind of think about how that evolution has happened as far as marketing and labeling and what they're putting these books on the shelves as. That kind of feeds into this though, because now it's like, well, if you cross the genres, then of course you can call it something that's nice and pretty, and you don't have to, put it out in the, leave it up in the attic as horror. You can call it paranormal or urban romance. You call it something different, and then all of a sudden it's
dark fantasy, urban fantasy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so I think that's a thing that happened too,
Yeah. I mean, I remember that Stephen King's, was it Pet Sematary was labeled, the movie at least was labeled as a thriller. And I kept thinking, who's being fooled by that?
Like,
right.
Is that really tricky? I don't know.
Look at Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. I read that because I had read one of his, like, I think it was A Room with a View, or it was not As the World Turns. Oh Lord. Anyway, I had come to it after reading some of his more straight, like, literary fiction, and so I started reading Never Let Me Go, and I thought to myself, this is speculative fiction. This is a body farm. Like, this is not literary. But look at A Handmaid's Tale. For the longest time, Margaret Atwood not wanting that to be, well, this is not speculative fiction. This is literary. It's very serious. Okay, it is serious, but it's also speculative fiction. My friend.
Right. Yeah. Right. You can think that, however.
But I understand, like, when that came out, why she would want to promote it that way, because I mean, we've gone back around in terms of hostility to women, but certainly when that came out, there was a lot of hostility toward feminism. So
I think of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Jack Benny, right? It was sci-fi when I saw it. I think the Donald Sutherland's version of the movie, I think it was labeled as sci-fi, and I'm watching going, are you sure? I mean, it's a little scary.
Are you sure?
It's been there for a while.
It's got Alice Cooper in it. It can't be.
Right? I'm like, there's some things you just are bygone conclusions. But I mean, so what are your favorites, if we can talk about that real quick? What favorites do you have out there? Old or new?
For genre mashups?
Leslie, genre mashups for sure, and it could be movie or film. Okay. I mean, film or movie. That's brilliant. Written or film, whichever.
Oh, I would say Beloved by Toni Morrison. I mean, because for years it was literary, and it is very lyrical. It's beautiful, but I mean,
it's a horror novel.
As a Black woman, when I first read it, I was like, "Ew, this is my people." Right?
This is a horror novel. Yeah,
even though the literary, crew didn't want to let it go, but Beloved, it's like, of course, like everything.
Yeah. Yep. Another one of those things. I'm like, this is a ghost story. What are you talking about right now? Yeah. Anyway.
I'm going to say Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower.
Okay.
I read it as a horror novel. I have seen it described as sort of like poly sci-fi, like political science fiction. I've seen it described as a thriller. I've seen it described every possible way imagined, except for as a comedy, because there is nothing funny in it. But it is a very horrifying book, and unbelievably well written. And that for me is a real crossover kind of horror novel. I can't imagine somebody at a Barnes and Noble trying to shelve that book and having any idea what to do, because writers think of genre as a launch pad and bookstores think of genre as a cage, and they would not know what to do with that book. But it is so beautiful. It is so good.
That might have been the quote of the day, Michael. That was a good one.
Well, thank you.
He's brilliant. Nice. I told you he's brilliant.
I'm gonna tell you. I'm going into movies. I'm gonna tell you The Fifth Element.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Science fiction, action, comedy, romance. There's a thriller in there. That thing coming to destroy us is a horror. There's 6 different things going on in that movie.
Yes.
And I can't find one person who's ever watched that and found a flaw. Just like, it is probably one of the most enjoyable films that I've ever seen. And I mean, I almost want to say, they quote and say it's perfect. Like, I've never seen a film blend that many genres together and it worked. Usually it just crashes and burns at some point, but it literally it worked from beginning to end. So that would be my absolute genre bending favorite of all time.
In the same vein, Alien, because it's not just science fiction and it's not just horror. It's also a workplace drama.
He's right though.
He's not wrong.
No, he's not wrong, because one of the biggest gripes in the film was that Parker and what's the name? They were arguing over the fact that they wanted their percent.
Yeah.
And that the union, they had to go through the union to get their pay. It was like, look, you don't land with the ship, you don't get your cut. You forfeit your yeah. He's right. It is a workplace drama.
With some musical theater in there as well.
Yes.
I would say the Cornetto trilogy, just because every one of those movies takes like a sharp left turn. Like it starts out one story and then it's like, satanic cults, aliens, zombies, and then, all the references to other movies of those ilk in there. So those are always really fun for me. In terms of books, I think the Drive-In by Joe Lansdale.
Okay.
Because it's just such a weird. I mean, there's sci-fi, there's horror, there's folksy. There's just weird. It's just bizarro. I guess it falls into bizarro.
What an interesting, bizarro is one of those genres that you can't put your finger fully on.
Exactly. That's why I read it.
Yeah, okay.
I tried to talk to people about splatterpunk, but nobody wanted to talk about it except John Skip. He's the only one who would talk about it.
That, and I don't cringe about a lot, but I don't know.
Really?
I think in Sprinkled In is good, but really? I don't know. For me, I can't. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
I love splatter. I don't write a lot of it, but I enjoy reading it. But I also don't read a lot of it because after reading half of an anthology, I start laughing. The parts you're not supposed to laugh at.
Well, that's the whole point. You should be laughing. That's why I read horror. It makes me feel good.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna cheat just a little bit because one of the reasons why I enjoy reading and writing so much is because I had my mom on the shelf in our home were several collections of Ray Bradbury short stories.
Yes.
And if you read one of those cover to cover, which I did multiple times when I was
I love his work.
You encounter so many different genres.
Oh yeah.
At first you're on the Veldt, which is very much science fiction, but it's also horror, like the creepy kids kind of horror. Or you're the family, like the spooky family. I can't remember the name. It was in the October Country, and it was you weren't scared of the characters. It was more like maybe urban fantasy. And so he just encompassed all of these different realms and genres in the stories in the book. I read them so many times. Any other faves?
Yeah, I think it was the early 80s on HBO, and they still have it on HBO Max if you want to see it. They did a movie called Cast a Deadly Spell. And it's a private detective. It's also set in the 40s, so they do a lot of 1940s type movie stuff, but it's also magic. So they set the world up with like 2 sentences. They say it's Hollywood 1940, everybody used magic. That's all they put on the screen, and that's it, and they're off and running. And it was like urban fantasy before urban fantasy. The only other thing I'd ever seen like that was Paul Anderson's Operation Chaos, which is a World War II story, but it takes place in an alternate world where there is magic. So the spy is a werewolf, and his love is a witch, and they're just going to war with all this stuff. And so I really love those kind of things, both of those, when I was a kid, and they really influenced a lot of my work.
So I said my favorite was, I'm sorry, Michael, go.
Oh yeah, I'm just gonna say I need to drop, but
yes.
Thank you so much. No, it's all good. Y'all need
Thank
to
you
talk
for
because
hanging
this
with
is
us.
fantastic.
Thank you
so much.
Good chatting.
I'll be quick because I feel like I talked a lot already.
No, and I'm loving all of it. Keep going. What are you talking about?
So one of my favorite movie mashup is The Crow. If you can't tell, it's behind me.
Oh.
And beneath that, you can't see that, but there's like a small shrine. But it's a love story and it's a horror film.
Yeah.
It's a revenge movie in ways that like a revenge Western is, which also appeals to me. And it's dark fantasy. So it's a lot of different things mashed up. And you were talking about a perfect movie. It was a perfect movie. A horrific, and that horror spilled out, right? Beyond just the film with Brandon's death.
Yeah.
But it's my favorite. And I've already said what my favorite like mashup literature book is, and that's series here, and it's The Dark Tower. And my favorite of those 8 books is of course the first one.
Yeah.
It was the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think too on one of my favorite things on TV was that BBC iteration of Dracula.
Oh,
Yes.
Louis Jourdan.
Oh my
Oh, that
gosh,
was
yes,
good.
I loved it. Like, I mean, I am a diehard fan of the Coppola version from, is it 92, 93? Like, it was just beautifully shot. It was
96? One of them, I don't know.
No, no,
But the
90.
one, yeah, the one
right.
from that the BBC did, though, I think
It was also
really,
good.
really,
Mhm.
it really, except for the fact that he had other partners besides Agatha that he ended up with, it really could have almost fit into romance, almost, like, that's the only thing that made it not. It has huge romantic elements, though.
It
Their
did.
romance, the foreplay, it went through the whole thing. There was science there, of course. There was blood. There was lots of blood, lots of horror stuff. But I think it very masterfully blended, at least those 3 genres. As well as, it was, it took place at different time periods also, which I thought kind of gave each section a totally different vibe. So that was, it's masterful. I use it every chance I get in class just because I love it so much.
I'm
What
gonna
about,
watch that
what
one.
about someone's, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, Chuck Palahniuk?
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
So like I've read so much horror my whole life. I grew up on Tomb of Dracula and all that stuff. I'm just a horror geek. But he in Choke wrote a scene that stays with me and grosses me out more than any other scene I've ever read in any other thing.
Wow. Okay.
I know, and I wouldn't consider him a horror writer. Although
I don't know, maybe.
I'm not sure what category he fits in.
And
I guess-
that's the beauty of this conversation, the whole category thing, we're like throwing it aside. So that was actually perfect. So let me ask you this. Do you think there are any genres that really shouldn't be mashed up? Like just either it's taboo to mash them up or it just doesn't work, or like anything that you shy away from or just don't want to try to write yourself or read?
Kidlit.
Right.
I heard pig. Would you say pig?
Piglet, that's what I
Kidlit.
heard. That's what
I heard piglet. I'm like, excuse me?
Yeah, me too.
There should be no oinks in this. Okay. Sorry. It's late here. I'm so sorry.
Oh gosh. And by that I don't mean that children's books should be confined to one genre or another. I do mean that if an adult is writing for kids, I think it really you have to be aware and be very specific about your choices, because there's things I think that are more appropriate for writers to address. Now, kids as readers, if they're anything like me, they'll be like, "Oh, look at this book that's way too advanced for me. I'm going to read it cover to cover."
Right.
But as writers, I do think that there's a certain responsibility towards addressing stories that we tell. But other than that, man, I think people should go crazy.
Yeah.
I want to read the craziest thing you could think of.
Yes. With intention, though. With intention.
Yes.
Like none of that accidental, I'm just going to throw all this stuff together and it's just going to be brilliant, because that doesn't work. It has to be intentional. Yes. But
no kitchen sinks, right? Because really?
Although a little wabi sabi is cool.
Yeah, with purpose, right? I agree with Rhonda, with purpose. I think that's with anything though. Intention, purpose. You can make it work.
Hey, Nicole, I have an idea for an anthology now.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Hold on, let me get my pen so I can start writing.
Hey, Mark, you still owe me.
What story? No, the werewolf?
No.
What
Yeah,
do
the
I-
werewolf.
She's
The werewolf.
asking.
I
Right.
sent
Did
you
you
the
do werewolf?
werewolf.
Okay, then we're good. Sorry, I have like
Okay.
4 anthologies right now. So
I will resend you the werewolf then.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I love that. I love that you got called out on the panel. I think that's fantastic.
And then he's like, and of course, I'm calling him out, but I'm also completely wrong.
That's true. That was funny, but we don't have to talk about that. But now that intention part we talk about, that's the hard line to straddle, isn't it? That's where the issue is. That's where when the editors were saying you're unfocused was, I don't care if you're throwing a whole kitchen sink in there, that you might be unfocused, right? But then there's you can't say, well, don't mix horror, sci-fi, comedy, and mystery. They don't go together because they might go together for whatever that story is.
Scooby-Doo said it does, so it works.
Yeah, I mean,
That's it.
I don't see how you make a distinction of when too much is enough, like too much is too much. 6 genres are in there with a couple of, possible diving into maybe some subgenres within those genres. So you could be looking at a whole bunch. Is that the kitchen sink or is that just fine? Is it really
It depends how it feels.
Is it
know?
feel? Yeah, I was gonna say, is it
I
just
agree.
feel? Yeah.
Yeah, if it flows, if it flows right, it can be a wonderful thing. It's when it goes off when it goes off the rails, when they change showrunners on stuff like American Gods. When we have a great thing going and then we get some guy coming there that says, oh, you know what? I don't like the fact that you're catering to the people who like this. I'm gonna change this and make it into something I want. And then look like they're in shock when everybody jumps ship and leaves and goes, well, I don't understand what happened. Because you completely removed what made it special.
You had Brian
Sleepy
Fuller.
Hollow. Like Sleepy Hollow was perfect, right? Sleepy Hollow was a great mashup, right? Ichabod Crane, a police detective. It's now, and it was so great, and then they ruined it.
Every time they take Orlando Jones out of something, they ruin it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
note to self, like note to everyone: don't take Orlando Jones out.
Keep him.
I think it also matters too, though, like if what you're doing is already its own subgenre, right? Because then it decreases the numbers of things you're mashing together, technically. So, like for instance, if you have a paranormal romance, that is already defined by the parameters of romance, but there are paranormal elements. So you already have the horror or the paranormal. So really, if you set it in, I don't know, space or at these sci-fi elements, you really technically only have a mashup of 2 as opposed to 3. So I think it kind of matters if whether or not there's already a combination there.
Right.
So you're saying that my Shifter Astronauts on Mars paranormal science fiction romance series is
That's great. That ain't too much going on at all. That's only like 3 things. See, it's not 12, it's 3.
Oh my God. So let me ask you, how, as writers, and filmmakers, how do you find your audience when you have this just mash of stuff? How do you find the audience that's looking for this thing?
I just invite writers to the screenings now.
That's one way.
They totally get it,
Hard question, right? I mean,
I feel like it's a Tim Wagner question. I haven't written 50 books.
I'm just going to say it probably depends on if there's like a dominant thread that runs through it or a feel.
Yes.
So if it has a darker feel, maybe you'll go for a genre that's, labeled thriller or horror, even if it has the other elements. Otherwise, if you're lucky, you just get an editor that thinks this is awesome and we're just going to go ahead and mark it as awesome book. And then if you're really, really lucky, you get to be a genre of your own by your name. So that's what I think Chuck, I can't say his name either, Palahniuk or whatever. He's his own genre, I think. And so Stephen King at this point. And so that's like the apotheosis of being a writer is that, you are your own brand.
Yes.
Like Neil Gaiman's like that.
Well, the people whose voices are so,
right,
remain the same. And I mean, I can, Joe Lansdale's voice, it's, you hear his voice when in the writing. So,
Yeah, that's not an easy question. I mean, I think that for anyone who's watching this, who's on the different, we're all going to be coming to this, approaching this from different levels. I mean, Tim wrote 50 books. Written, you know what I mean? I'm just saying it's the truth. I mean, 50 is a big
I've
number.
read your work.
Yeah. We all start from somewhere, and we all are going to, come to this. And I think the most important thing is that no one here is saying don't do it. No one's here saying don't cross genres at all. We all are thinking that it's a positive thing. So here's one last question, because I didn't realize how close we were getting to time, but we are here. Let me ask you one last question. What is the and this is for each of you. What are the last, like your last piece or the last cross genre piece that you wrote? What genres did you mash up?
Well, one of the stories in my collection is titled "I Will Only Love You Better After Death." And I really heavily crossed up romance. Well, it was historical, but it was also a love story that had these really horrific elements in it. And so, I mean, that's the way the story came to me. And I think it's absolutely one of my favorite stories that I've ever written, ever in life. And so that has to be like the latest thing that I've done.
It breaks your heart a little bit, folks, that story. That whole, Some stuff had me walking away going, I don't. Nobody's supposed to cry when they read books, and you're not supposed to be sitting up here like this, but I was. So listen,
wonderful.
Just saying.
Great. Yeah, so in the Joe Lansdale documentary, I used guerrilla footage I shot of him in Nacogdoches. I used audio interviews of a lot of celebrities because I did a $25,000 budget by myself. Ooh. So I just called people, did, audio interviews, and then used stills. I have a whole bunch of animation in the film. And then there's a lot of stock footage from drive-ins. So yeah, it's a mix of, and then there's, I sort of encompassed Joe's life. So there's like a martial arts section, a piece on his family, a piece on his writing, and a piece on the TV stuff, and mixing the media through those different things he does.
Nice. That's interesting.
I think the last book I finished mashed up horror and dark fantasy and science fiction and kind of a buddy cop sort of. It has a little bit of comedy in it too. Nice. So yeah, I all that stuff, maybe some other stuff I threw in there, I don't know. Those are the dominant ones that I can remember.
Nice. Okay.
What's that one called?
It's called The Atrocity Engine.
Oh, yes.
That's a good
title.
Out.
I don't know when it's coming out, but it's going to come out from Athon Books.
Okay.
That is a very cool
title. So my thesis for my master's, which I'm hopefully going to turn that into a book. It's got a little bit of horror. It's got paranormal. I've got a medium. All right, I just go with this way. Is a vampire in there. There's a medium in there. There's a couple of college students that are having relationship issues. There's a spell. There's a dark spell that's being used. So it's I've kind of crossed. I don't know. I don't even know. I carefully chose what I needed to make work in this story. Let's put it that way. And I think it works.
Awesome. Nicole, did you have anything recent?
Yeah, I'll be quick. It's fantasy, mystery, and birds.
Birds. Okay, I didn't see
that. Mythology.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming. I totally thought you were going to say something about a weird Western. Okay. Very cool. Well, we are at time, folks. Thank you so much for a lively conversation as usual. If we can really quickly, let's talk about where we can find you out in the interwebs. Tim, let's start with you. You're on my left again.
If you just go to timwaggoner.com, there are links to all my social media stuff. So one-stop shopping for Tim.
Nicole Givens Kurtz.net. Social media links, buy links.
Cool. Rhonda?
You can find me on Twitter all the time at rjacksonjoseph. And you can probably find me on podcast too somewhere at Genre Black Academia and at the Speculative Fiction Academy.
You can also find me there as well.
That's right. You can find Marc there as well. Hansi?
Yeah.
My company is called Scree Projects, and we have a website, squeeprojects.com. And I'm also on everything else as Scree Projects: Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok.
Wow. Okay, then. No, so we all took the same class that said label everything the same. It's just your branding. Mark?
Who is marclabbot.com?
Cool.
Yep.
And Rachel?
So my website is www.infamous-scribbler.com because I did not get that memo.
Ah, yeah.
However, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Rachel A. Brune. And if you're interested in horror anthologies, and we just had one come out today, in which there are a number of familiar faces in the table of contents. That is cronegirlspress.com and Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at cronegirlspress.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Love the discussion. We will chat soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Lisa.
Great job.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Lisa.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.